Hey guys, I'm recording this video with Melissa off camera, but she's here listening in. She can chime in and derail my monologue at any point. I'm going to talk about a few different subjects here, socio-political and economic. Going to talk about the free market. Going to talk about democracy. Going to talk about equality. Maybe reaching back to some of the ancient Greek sources we've been reading a lot lately. I just finished reading Cicero and the Memorabilia by Xenophon, which is really a book to some extent about and by and extensively quoting Socrates. But Socrates is not the stated author, it's Xenophon. I want to say in setting up this video, well, two things. First of all, you'll notice I'm using this peculiar microphone instead of my familiar sphere. We have ordered a new microphone in the mail. It'll arrive in a few days probably. But I'm sorry to tell you that microphone has finally died the death. It's died its last death. So it served me long and hard. It was in and out of a suitcase and went all around the world with me. It's been dropped on the floor of 2 or 3 continents: Europe, Asia, and North America. But alas, this too will pass. These things are impermanent, and we've got a new microphone on the way now. The other thing I was going to say before we get into the political and economic discussion here, I've reflected just earlier today while Melissa was out at the gym. We worked out separately today. I went to the gym earlier than she did. Something happens to a lot of these successful YouTube channels. And in my way, in my tiny way, I have been a successful YouTube channel. I can say what I mean by that later. But channels like Onision and The Amazing Atheist. So The Amazing Atheist changed his name. He's now just TJ Kirk, just his personal name. They normally start off with some very clear sense of purpose, mission, and mandate. And then at some point, and it's a dotted line, there's not a clear break, instead the channel just becomes about their personality. So there was a video, not worth describing, from TJ Kirk, and Onision has done 100 videos like this, where he's reflecting on the fact that his channel is less successful than it used to be, and agonizing over the meaning of life, and YouTube algorithms, and advertising revenue, and these issues. And those two men have reacted to it very, very differently, Onision and TJ Kirk, but both in their way, honestly, I might add. But The Amazing Atheist used to be a channel about atheism. There used to be a very clear point, and you could define what is the function of this channel for its audience. It's debunking religious views. It's debating certain religious leaders. He had a debate with that guy Phelps, the head of the Westboro Baptist Church. The famous anti-homosexual protesters who would protest at people's graves. He had an interview with them back in the day. He used to have content that was really linked to that mission. And today, what is the channel about? It's not about something. It's about someone. Right? Now, Onision, likewise, I'd say, deteriorated in much the same way, and he's not entirely pleased with it himself. But, I didn't think his channel always made jokes about sex, but it became about his sex life and his sexual preferences, and, that changes, and his feelings and what, et cetera, et cetera. So my channel, look, when I started my channel, it was about me. It's the opposite. My channel has never been a channel about veganism. I've answered this question many times back in the day. I used to point out, look, I'm not bite-sized vegan. I'm not a natural vegan. I'm not veganism 101. I'm not Aaron Janis. I'm not doing, guess where wool comes from? Guess where yogurt comes from, kids? I'm not doing any of those introductory topics. Channel's just about me and my life. It's always been about my relationship with my daughter, my divorce. You rewatched recently one of those old videos. It's always been about my sex life and my personality and my psychology and what I'm going through. It just so happens I'm mildly obsessed with vegan politics. And look, there are other things there too. It's not worth going into, but I imagine there'd be more material about politics of Asia on the channel. There are several videos about politics of China. I thought there'd be more than I thought I'd have other people to collaborate with talking about politics. Politics in Canada, but politics in Asia especially. And that just did not fly. So that was a failure, although I can't think of it really as a personal failure, because the failure did not have to do so much with me. It had to do with many other things, many other people in the context surrounding me. So, I've launched this new channel, and my own channel about Luciel is going into a new era. does my channel now serve a function like this? Does it have a mandate? Does it have a purpose? Right? And if so, what is that purpose, supposed to be? Or is it, am I going into the same kind of doldrums? Because I get email encouraging me. I've had messages, different social media forms, people writing to me, encouraging me just to talk more about my psychology. I had a ton of encouragement the last couple of days. Talk more about nihilism. Talk more about your personal philosophy and your feelings. And if you do that, you're digging yourself down, down, down into a narrower and narrower audience of people who love you. I mean, people who really care about you. Which is wonderful. I got that. Someone did a cartoon today making fun of me, which was great. But it was making fun of me, and wow, the jokes really showed a lot of knowledge about me and my life. Like not just, there was stuff I'd forgotten about. I was like, oh yeah, right. I used to say that all the time. Like, oh yeah, 5 years ago, that was like a catchphrase. So there's a lot of knowledge of who I am, but even in making fun of me. So if you take that path, you're digging down, deeper and deeper. And in naming this new channel, Active Research, Informed Opinion, I think it's a little bit obvious that what I hope to do, what I aspire to do, is go back to the library and actually start doing, active research and offering informed opinion. That I look around at what's currently on the internet in political opinion making, whether it's Jimmy Dore or T.J. Kirk, or these various classical liberals and conservatives and the right-wing commentators, Ben Shapiro, garbage. And there's knowing more than other people in terms of looking at knowledge as something static, and there's looking at knowledge as something dynamic and what you can do with what you know. And I'm really aware I could do a better job in that lane if I threw myself into it. And by the way, shout out to Jimmy Dore, but Jimmy Dore is a former nightclub entertainer. And when Jimmy Dore talks about international politics and war or economics or these, I'm laughing at him. I mean, I'm on a much, much higher level in those areas than he is, and he doesn't have any false humility about that. I think Jimmy Dore is genuinely humble about what he's got to offer in that line of work. So it's an open question. Am I now going to do the reverse and really commit to being less of a personal channel, and instead serving a function, having a clear mandate that is about, I think, politics in one word. And the flip side of that is what we were just talking about off camera before I hit record here, which is that the other thing from day one my channel has been about was making friends. And that's also some of the bitterest conflicts came out of that, because some people, I told them I didn't want to be friends with them. And they hated me. But that's, sorry, it can happen at a nightclub party, it can happen at a coffee shop, happens in primary school. There's somebody who wants to walk home with you and wants to eat lunch with you, and you say, no, I don't want to sit here. Did you have lunch in a bucket? Did you eat lunch in a...
My mom packed my lunch.
Yeah, but in a bucket or in what? Like what kind of...
Brown bag.
In a brown bag, okay. Right. Not #0 waste. So when I was a kid, the fashion was actually, a reusable plastic container.
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
Zipped around the...
Okay, but it was still a bag. Okay, whatever. The fashion's coming and go. Yeah. Anyway. But where you opened your lunchbox and who you sat next to, this is a big deal. So but yeah, when trying to make friends, you're also trying to reject people. You know what I mean? Rejection and selection, and there's that going on both sides. And there are people I've reached out to in friendship, and they just don't get back to me or whatever, and you got to accept that. Okay, they don't want to hang. They don't want to sit and eat their lunch roast with me. So I'd say, though, that's the other thing that's still going on. It's very real for me, and it's very real for Melissa. And, I think most people in our generation lead very isolated lives. I don't think we're special or exceptional that way. There are many reasons for that, including the reality of the 21st century job market, moving from town to town, blah, blah, blah. There are all these different intersecting factors whereby we tend to isolate ourselves and end up isolated. But the economic factors being the most compelling that, Anyway, and look, the other thing is, ultimately the school system assigns you to a classroom of a random group of strangers. There's no reason. There's no reason why your friends for life or colleagues or your fellow vegan activists you're going to work with would be people who happen to who took English in room 6A. And those are the friends you were given by society, right? So, anyway, society meaning here the school system. Yeah. So that's a struggle, and that's going on all the time, and that's really part of the raison d'etre for the YouTube channel, and that's part of why I keep it so real, and why I'm even taking it so real and talking about this now. And I think that is a fundamental difference between me and Anissian. When Anissian comes on and talks about his marriage and his divorce and his agony, he's actually not doing it to make friends. I think it is truly drama. It's just, when if you're an actor, you don't act out Hamlet. Or what's a better King Lear? I can't come up with a better example. So it should be a drama that's actually about divorce. Othello, not quite. But anyway, actually, acting out a drama is not to make friends. The actor is not doing this to reach out to the audience. So I think that is something fundamentally different. And the other thing about the internet is, if you define your YouTube presence or internet presence around a mission and a mandate, what do you do if there are empty seats in the audience? What do you do when people don't turn up? Which can happen all the time on any topic. There are some videos that I think were my most meaningful video or most rewarding. There's some videos I make where I really feel I've got a message to share with the audience. No, they don't want to hear it. But if you're getting into active research and informed opinion, if you're taking that, if it's no longer just me talking about what I happen to be reading anyway, what happens to be meaningful in my life, well, what then? And right, so let's just acknowledge this. I mean, I learned from failure, but you can only learn from failure by recognizing it. You have to recognize failure first. You don't learn from making mistakes. You learn from recognizing your mistakes, right? But the book review series I did, that's a great example of that. I did this book review series, and I was actively hoping other vegan activists would read the same book and get back to me and talk to me, even by email, but sure, by Skype or by Google Hangouts or whatever, that we'd have other people collaborating in that, and we'd actually get productive discussion. And that was a failure. That was a failure in terms of the other vegans who care about politics, which is only so many dozen people, and it was a failure in terms of the audience. The audience interest was very, very low. Again, I'd say there's more audience interest in me just talking about my psychology or talking about like books of philosophy that influenced me when I was a teenager. That stuff had more positive feedback. So when there are empty seats in the audience, does that change, how you feel about it? Or are you so committed, like, yeah, I'm gonna make one video after another with hard-hitting criticisms of Canadian mainstream party politics, and if the audience doesn't like it, that's their problem. So these are tough questions, and we're going into a new phase of our lives when time is going to be scarce, more scarce than ever before. So these are big decisions to make. All right. So with all that having been said, I got a message from a viewer. I guess I'll call him John. His name's actually John. He says, quote, unrelated to this video, but I always wanted to ask you something. I've heard you say on multiple occasions that you're not a socialist and not a communist. This is true. But I've had several videos lately, if you guys haven't seen them, talking, in a sense, making a limited defense of the concept of socialism, which is much misrepresented, especially by libertarians, conservatives, etc. So I point out very briefly that things like sewage treatment are generally socialist, universal public education, and this sort of thing. They can be described accurately as socialist policies and socialist functions of government. But no, in terms of the political meaning of being a socialist, I am not a socialist, and I am not a communist. And I think that's already clear in the earlier videos why that is. So anyway, this message continues. Quote, I feel as though you've not even put yourself on the left wing, not that it matters very much. So, close quote, I'll come back to this message. It depends on where I'm living. So if we move to Texas, I think I'm left wing in Texas. You know what I mean? It really is relative to where you're living. I considered moving to Greece. Modern Greece, not ancient Greece. But, back in the aftermath of the financial crisis, Greece was a disaster area, and I had a lot of different reasons, including humanitarian interests. That great. I can move to Greece. Greece is the new Cambodia. And it was interesting for me to see that in Greece, I think I would have been actually at about the center of the political spectrum. But whenever I looked at moving to a country, researching different areas, it's also interesting to look at, well, would I be considered left-wing or right-wing here? And a fascinating one's Taiwan, right? In Taiwan, there really is no left or right. In Taiwan, the political spectrum really has to do with how pro-China you are, which is normally called being pro-reunification, but it's really how pro-China or how anti-China you are. And believe it or not, despite the fact that we just lived in China, and in some ways China is a wonderful country, I'm within Taiwanese politics. I'm on the anti-China, pro-democracy, anti-totalitarian end of the spectrum. So then that's interesting. In Taiwan, it's really interesting who that puts you in bed with, because a lot of those, for example, interestingly, a lot of those people are Christians in Taiwan. A lot of them are kind of American influenced Christians, Chinese people, but with more American influence in their culture and values via American Protestant churches, which I wouldn't have assumed at all before I went to Taiwan and lived there. As an example, I thought I'd be hanging out with a bunch of groovy vegan Buddhists, but no. You conservative Buddhists can very often be at the opposite end of the political spectrum. All right. I continue. Quote, despite this, I can imagine you'd be critical of an American-style system which creates the incredible amount of inequality that it does. Pause. Right. So Melissa and I, lately, we opened up the website, the official website of the campaign to elect Bernie Sanders for president. Right. So it's an old website. It's a little bit out of date. But that was his official platform and his promises, and I was interested to see his promises on inequality. Now, this could be a whole separate video, I'm going to say to you, but it's not. This is an important point. At different points, at different moments in the history of the social sciences, economics, politics, etc., a particular statistic seems to set people's imaginations afire. And what's now called the Gini coefficient is an example of this. So the Gini coefficient is a measurement of inequality. It's a way of just putting into an equation and putting on a chart how much of a problem is wealth inequality or even just wage inequality in your country. Okay, the Gini coefficient. I think it's just based on wages, not wealth. So it's really just income inequality, which is highly imperfect. You can be a retired person with zero income, but tremendous wealth. Right? Right. But most countries now, taxation is based on income, not on wealth. This creates other problems. So the Gini coefficient is currently fashionable, and people are attributing to it problems and solutions to problems that they shouldn't be. There was a period of time, I don't forget if it lasted 10, 20 years, when there was a huge fashion for what was called the efficient markets hypothesis. And the efficient markets hypothesis, if you look it up on Wikipedia now, you won't understand what the fuss is about. You say, this is a statistic, this is such a dry, meaningless mathematical theorem. Who cares? Sorry, it's not even a statistic, it's a mathematical theory. Well, it set the imagination of people on fire, especially neoconservatives and neoliberals, and what it really led to, the efficient markets hypothesis, was the mentality that as long as the stock market was doing well, everything in society was doing well. And it's actually a perspective that's really worth refuting. We have to stop people and say, no, in Cambodia, the stock market could be booming, but public education is terrible. The stock market can be booming, and people are dying of cholera. Like, this is real life, right? Cambodia is one example, but it could be any third world country. You have a third world country where the diamond mine is producing fantastic wealth, and maybe they have a little bit of a booming tech sector. Maybe they've spun off some assembly plants for circuit boards with low wages or something. The stock market could be doing really well, and the police are corrupt, and the police are taking people hostage and, extorting their relatives for money. And the education system is a disaster, and maybe people believe in a religion like voodoo. I'm sorry, voodoo is a real religion, by the way, in Haiti. But look, I'm a nihilistic atheist. Normally I pick on the Catholic Church, but voodoo as an example. It's not like I can approve of voodoo as a religion, and terrible things they're committing crimes because they see demons and ghost possession or what have you. They're harming one another. There's kind of a near infinite list of unbelievably grave and serious social dysphoria that are in no way reflected in the stock market, right? But I think education alone is a great example. Healthcare system is a great example too. So it's interesting, the efficient markets hypothesis and its kind of knock-on imaginarium, this kind of imagined realm of values attached to it. It went out of style all of a sudden in the year 2008 with that financial crisis. But that was a very powerful part of the neoliberal and neoconservative worldview, for, I don't know, maybe 15 years, for a significant length of time. Now, in the same way, Bernie Sanders on his website has an impressive looking chart of how much the Gini coefficient has worsened since the early 1990s, since about 1992. Here's the problem. I can remember 1992. If you think this statistic alone makes such a difference, if you think it's so important, why wasn't the world dramatically better in 1992 when this statistic was dramatically better? Right? Now I'm going to come back to why that is and state my own position on this, but I'm just provoking you. In countries where the Gini coefficient has gotten worse, yes, it's a problem. I guess. Oh, sorry, I shouldn't even say this. The Gini coefficient, it's like a canary in a coal mine. It's an indication of a problem. But it neither really reflects the social problems nor the advantages or virtues of the society you happen to be living in. It can really be very misleading. So I'm going to come back to this. So, yes, obviously inequality is problematic, and we can talk about that. But we right now have a situation where the Gini coefficient is very, very fashionable, and this kind of simplistic metric measuring inefficiency in the economy is, I think, I can't even say it's not being cynically misused by left-wing people. Likewise, the efficient markets hypothesis wasn't being cynically misused by right-wing people. They really believed in it, and that belief is ill-founded. And you can see that, you can experience that if you just look at that chart and try to remember back to your youth about how different society was in 1992, wherever you happen to be living. You can look at different periods of time within the same society, or you can make comparisons sometimes to two adjacent societies, two small countries in Europe, where really living conditions are the same, but they have remarkably different scores on the Gini coefficient. You can do comparisons of this kind, and you start to figure out, wow, what really matters is things like, do you have good hospitals and good education and a lot of other things like that, which again I'll come back to. And this statistic in isolation, it tells you something, but it tells you a lot less than people want to imagine it does. Okay, so he goes on to say, despite this, I can imagine you'd be critical of an American-style system which creates the incredible amount of inequity that it does, he says, leaving so much in the hands of so few, while so many have so little. Quote, I think it's obvious. I'm just kind of skipping ahead here. His point is, can you speak to how you'd improve upon this American-style free market system without creating a Cuban or Venezuelan-style system? So this is question one. Question two, also, do you generally agree that inequity is the enemy of democracy? I think he really does mean inequality, but whatever, let's not quibble over semantics. All right. So the second question is the fastest to answer. So Melissa and I have been reading the ancient Greek. She's doing her own video, so I'm not going to attribute her. I'm not going to speak for Melissa. But the issue of equality is huge in Athenian democracy. It's huge and fundamental, and the world would be a better place if people had a better education in the ancient Greeks. And sorry, I should clarify. I don't mean ancient Greek drama, tragedy, mythology. I don't mean Homer. I don't mean the Odyssey. I don't mean the literature. I really mean a select, narrow band of political, historical texts. And the most political of the philosophical texts. I don't really mean the metaphysics. I don't really mean the debates over whether the earth is round or flat, which they got in ancient Greece, by the way, baby. What is the shape of the world? You could spend a couple days just reading their competing theories on the shape of the planet. Yeah, it's interesting this way. But that's normally called cosmology. There are speculations about the shape of the world and the solar system based on the limited, observational data they had, which is very instructive. It tells you something about that society. But no, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the political end of the swimming pool. But there was a very simple line from Pseudo-Xenophon talking about the Constitution of Athens. And, he says, bluntly in passing, a democracy is a country ruled by the poorest. Democracy is a system that puts government in the hands of the poorest. Right? That's something totally different from equality. Right? And that's my concern. I want government for the poor, of the poor, by the poor. Again, I'm not speaking for Melissa. Maybe Melissa's going to have different conclusions. And you don't just see this in pseudo-Xenophon, of course. This is discussed in, well, Plato, several books, the Politics, the Ethics, the Constitution of Athens. But even, I just finished reading Cicero. Cicero on the Republic. There's an issue that comes up again and again. The poor, it's saying ruled by the poor, you're not talking about a society where everyone's equal. You're talking about a society where Parliament, or your equivalent to Parliament, has poor people in it, is controlled by the poor, and is concerned with and operating for and serving the interests of the poorest. Not the middle class, the poorest, right? That's what my concern is. The rich don't need government in the way that the poor do. Don't get me wrong. Yes, the rich, yeah, sure. The rich also need labeling on the side of their goods, telling you what the ingredients are. I mean, they benefit from that. The rich benefit when you provide sewage treatment that prevents the poor from dumping their sewage directly in the river. The rich benefit because the rich don't get cholera. The rich benefit when the poor are literate instead of illiterate. The rich benefit by the government providing education to the poor. However, the rich can pay for their own private education. What you have to be concerned about is the poorest, providing education and hospital care, etc., to the poorest. So I just point out, this is a concept that already rests on inequality, but it's a concept that prioritizes or indeed places power in the hands of the poorest. And this was seen as both the advantage and the disadvantage of Athens, was that decisions were being made in the interests of the poor, by and for the poor. And of course, interestingly, a figure like Cicero, he's very much reacting against that. He's really an anti-democratic philosopher, although, he plays his cards carefully, so he doesn't seem like, too much of a fascist. And, Plato and many of these other people, the people who actually lived through the execution of Socrates, partly because they saw the death of Socrates, they were so shocked by that, a lot of them really became critics of democracy or somewhat anti. Many of the most eloquent philosophers we have that let us see the virtues of Athenian democracy were themselves harsh critics of Athenian democracy, and they were not comfortable at all with rule by the poor, and they pointed out, again, even Pseudo-Xenophon himself, he says, if you let the poor control government, they build these bathhouses, they build bathhouses and massage parlors, and they spend the government budget on the Olympic Games and festivals and, crowd-pleasing sports stadiums and shit. It's true. Poor aren't angels. But just say this is actually my concern, is not equality. Now, of course, with that having been said, obviously, when political power is in the hands of the poor or is functioning for the poor, when government is for and about the poorest, it's going to ameliorate the conditions of the poor. I don't think it creates equality per se, but it creates, for example, access to education and healthcare and roads and all kinds of benefits, so yeah. But it's, I think enough said. But this is a different conceptual design. And also, again, this reflects my fundamental nihilistic ethic, which is that I say, no, for me, ethics is about doing the best you can. That's very different from starting with a kind of geometric concept of equality. All right, so the other half of this, so he's asking, do you generally agree that inequality is the enemy of democracy? And my answer is no. The enemy of democracy is aristocracy. The enemy of democracy is oligarchy. The enemy of democracy is monarchy. I can throw it in, although today it's not as much of a threat. If you are ruled by an oligarchy, which is, in my opinion, what Canada is ruled by, to be blunt, we have a system of polite oligarchy. Then democracy takes that unequal triangle and turns it upside down. But it's still an unequal triangle. And, sure, it'll probably be better for the poor. I mean, hard to see how it would be worse if you... I mean, just think about it. Sorry, Canadian Parliament has so many hundred seats. I don't have the numbers. How many of them are occupied by poor people? How many of them are occupied by the poorest? To use pseudo-funds. I mean really poor. I don't mean Obama. People talk about Obama. He was a professor of law at a major university. People talk about Obama as being poor. Well, he was poor compared to Mitt Romney. Mitt Romney was a multimillionaire. Donald Trump is a multimillionaire. So Obama, right? George W. Bush, multimillionaire. So compared to these people that go Obama is poor. I'm not talking about law professors' salaried. I'm talking about really poor people. How often do poor people even speak in Parliament? Never. You can come up with some example. Maybe if you're watching this from Switzerland, probably the Swiss have drag in poor people to speak in parliament or something, just to make the rest of us feel like jerks. I mean, Swiss democracy is a very impressive system. But anyway, I don't know. I really don't know, though, if the poor speak in government much there. But, my point is, no, this is taking that triangle and turning it upside down. It's not turning the triangle into a square. Okay, mixed metaphor? No? Does that make sense? All right, stay with it. Okay, so he says, can you speak on how you would improve this American-style free market system without obviously creating a Cuban or Venezuelan-style system? Right. So my answer is very, very simple, but it's technical. So I'm very careful to say, for example, I do not believe, or sorry, let's try to keep the word believe out of this. I'm not proposing free healthcare for everyone. This may not be attainable. In Cambodia, it's not attainable. In Laos, it's not attainable. I've been in poor countries. This isn't even an option. What I am proposing is that nobody should be denied health care on the basis of their ability to pay. The other way I like to phrase this is access to health care should not be based on your ability to pay. So if you need heart surgery, you need lung surgery, your ability to access this surgery should not be based on your ability to pay. Right? So this is a subtle distinction. Well, the point is you can have a system where when millionaires, people who are over a certain, people have over $1 million in the bank, when they need surgery, maybe they pay. But you see, their access to it is not based on their ability to pay. But for poor people, this would not be an option. Well, you have no money. So there has to be a system in place to provide free medical care precisely for those who can't afford it. You see, that is different, and that is unequal. And many people say, well, that's unfair. You only want to give free health care to poor people. Exactly right. I want to give free health care to people who need free health care. But again, and this is a real-world thing, in countries like Cambodia and so on, you don't have the option. And there are also advantages to still having the price mechanism in healthcare, even if only the wealthiest 10% of people pay for healthcare. And even if they only pay 10% of it or something, the fact that you're still having the price mechanism where you're still figuring out how much does it cost to provide this surgery. And then again, I just want to be clear, if 10 different people need the same surgery at the same time, we have 10 people who are all need the same lung transplant. It's very important. I do not think you should be choosing who gets the surgery first and who has to wait 3 months based on their ability to pay. I think it's a very important moral issue. Whatever the criteria are, like maybe how likely you are to survive, there are going to be some, if you have a limited amount of healthcare you can give out, but that also can't. So my point is access to healthcare should not be based on ability to pay. Now, because I've said this at such length for healthcare, this is my same statement about education. I don't phrase the objective as everyone should have unlimited free education. I state it as access to education should not be based on ability to pay. You shouldn't be refused an education. You shouldn't be unable to get an education because you can't pay for it. And there are many ways to handle this. Sorry, I should mention this also for healthcare, but this is exactly the same whether you talk about education or healthcare. Another element here is debt. So if you have someone who's wealthy over the limit, so let's say it's not $1 million, let's say it's only $500,000. So okay, so this person has $500,000 in the bank, and they say, look, even though I've got $500,000, I can't afford med school. Like, it's really expensive to go through med school. Like, this is gonna really bankrupt my family, even though we're over the line. So great. What you want to have is a system in place so that the cost can be amortized over time. So okay, you go to med school now, and then after you graduate, we're going to take between 1% and 10% of your income to pay back the debt for your education over so many years, because you're wealthy enough to pay, and some people can pay and some people can't, or whatever it is. There are ways to delay costs, again, and systems like this exist all over the world, and it has to be done by the government. It can't be done by the credit card company. It can't be done by a predatory institution. And likewise, if you have a poor person who says they want to get a PhD in poetry, like something that's not likely to earn back a lot of money, you can also have something set up where you say, well, look, if the government is going to pay for your education in this area, we can't have you bear zero cost. You're poor. You can't pay now. But we can put you in a situation where even if it's 1% that comes out of your paycheck for the next 40 years, you gradually pay us back the cost of education. So this is my point. They're saying cost should not be a barrier, that access to education should not be based on the ability to pay, does not mean that there is no price, that there is no cost, or that the people taking it are unaware of the cost. All right. So he ends his message. I guess that's a lot to ask for in a video, but I would be curious to hear you speak on this topic. I'm a big fan. Keep up with the work. Okay, thank you. Thank you for the message. He actually said, "I'm a big fan of your brain, man." I felt embarrassed to read that compliment out. All right, cool. So this video's going long enough. I just wrap it up by saying I had a debate with a genuine, true believing anarcho-capitalist earlier today. And it was so hilarious to me. He was completely unable to cope with the very simple questions about how do you provide, if you believe in anarcho-capitalism, how do you actually provide education to the poor? How do you provide health care? How do you provide sewage treatment and this sort of thing? And, this guy was a true believer, but when asked directly, for example, if you believe this, then you must believe that right now you would be helping the Navajo Indians on their reservation in the middle of the desert by closing down and taking away their public schools, taking away their government-provided free education. If you believe in anarcho-capitalism, you believe that's hindering them and that's bad for them. They should instead be providing their own education out of pocket. And so it was a bizarre and very one-sided debate, because I'm very well informed about the whole history of education, philosophy of education. I've done research on that within the last year, so a lot of it's fresh in my mind, and I was able to pull out examples from the history of Europe and Asia and what have you, North America too. And by the end of the conversation, it was hilarious because it forced me to reflect. Even though I am an anti-communist, I said to him then, I said, "Wow, you've managed to present me with a philosophy that is actually worse than communism. As bad as communism may be, in communism, at least you have the fundamental concept of taking taxpayers' money and building hospitals for the poor, building schools for the poor." And we were just living in China. These are tremendously important fundamentals. They really do make in practice the difference between the Dark Ages and the modern age. Universal literacy, universal understanding of hygiene, universal understanding of physics, science, history, even economics, or what have you. And of course, it gives poor people access to employment they wouldn't otherwise have. It changes their economic destiny. But really, when you think about the fabric of civilization, providing education to the poor is such a fundamental thing. And it's really a great shame. I think it shows in many ways the hollowness of American civilization in 2018 that people don't care more about it. People cared about it back when they thought they were saving your soul, which is very sad. The main motivation for getting out and providing education to the Navajo and the Cree and the Ojibwe and the Mohawk was to try to force them to convert to Christianity. And there are still some people, whether they're Christian or Muslim, who have that missionizing influence. But it's a shame that as we now move into a more secular age, which is a better thing in so many ways, that I do not see that passion for education and educating the poor. And I ask you, coming back to the basic premise behind here, what is the meaning of democracy? What is the meaning of equality if it doesn't at least start with equal access to education for the poor?